What's up, my geeks? Jeffrey Powers from Geekazine. Today we are taking a look at this right here. It's the AGeen 80 gigabit per second external NVMe M2 drive, what's called the TV001 Pro, for USB 4.0 or 3.2, 3.1. It is backwards compatible USB-C drive, of course, that can run up to 80 gigabits per second. Drives that'll do 6,000 megabytes a second, so you can get your files transferred faster. And we're going to talk about that next on Geekazine. What's up, my geeks? Jeffrey Powers from Geekazine, Think Magazine, Putting the Geek. AGeen did send me product to review, and they are sponsoring this video, but all opinions are that of Geekazine. We have a full review area over at geekazine.com/review. And of course, if you've got a product that you want me to take a look at, all you have to do is contact me over at Geekazine. I'd like to thank my Patreons for being longtime supporters. You can be a Patreon over at patreon.com/Geekazine. Or if you'd like to send a one-time tip, all you have to do is go over to venmo.com/Geekazine. All right, what is this drive? This is the AGeen 80 gigabit per second M2 NVMe SSD enclosure. It is a USB 4 version 2.0. The idea is that when you put in a drive in here that does not come with a drive, you'll get around 6,000 megabits per second. Now, that's also dependent on what NVMe drive you have in there, and that these are all factors that will tell you about the performance on here. So what we're going to do is we're first going to unbox this and then take a look at what we've got on here and then connect it up to a computer and see how fast it runs. Inside we have the drive. We have the C2C cable. I believe this is going to be a USB 4.0, although it does say Thunderbolt 5 on the cable, so it might be also Thunderbolt compatible. We'll see as we go. What we have in here is a bag, and these are thermal pads like we've seen with some of the other NVMe enclosures, and these little rubber things right here are the stoppers for the NVMe. This doesn't use screws like some other NVMe drives. They use these rubber stoppers to keep the drive in check. Next thing we have here is the placeholders. If you've got an NVMe that's a little bit shorter than where the screw hole is or the stopper hole is, then you put these spacers in there to make sure that the NVMe stays fit. And then, of course, we have the instructions right here. All right, with that said and that done, let's get this out of the way and take a look at the drive. We have the drive right here. As you can see, we're taking a look at the side. There's a vent right here on the top. We have a vent. There is a fan in here, and I'm guessing this is where the fan is. These are just standard vents, which you'll see on both of the sides here. On the front here, we have the USB-C connection, and then we have a button. This is actually the fan speed. So if you want to make this thing go faster or slower, you just basically press this button. On the other side, we just basically have our open mark, and then on the bottom, there's nothing here. And this is how we open up this device. There are no screws to it. We just basically pull it open, and there it is. There's the inside of the device. And as we can see, we've got our NVMe drive, which goes right here. And this is where we put our rubber stopper. I have the Kingston KC3000 NVMe drive. This is a PCIe 4.0 drive that has a read and write speed of 7,000 megabits per second. So loading it into here, we should get some really good performance out of this. Like I said, this does not come with an NVMe drive, so you're going to have to supply one. Make sure that it is PCIe 4.0. There are PCIe 5.0 drives that are out there. You want to stick with the PCIe 4.0 with this drive. Let's go ahead and put that in. And for us to do that, we're going to need one of those rubber stoppers. We will not need the separators, which is great. And we're going to definitely need one of the thermal pads to keep it cool as we run. So here's the stopper. So the stopper will actually go into this hole right here. Just basically plug it in. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the NVMe. We're going to put that in like so. Nice angled up. I'll show you on the other camera here. So it's angled up like this. We will then take the stopper and we will place that into the drive, into the NVMe like so. And then we're going to push down and then, of course, pop it into that little plug hole right there. So now As you can see, it's in there. You want to be very careful about this because there's no screws on this thing, and especially with this, it does have little ball bearings on the sides that allow this case to stay on, but if you drop it, there is always a possibility that this thing could pop out. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of these thermal pads. You want to make sure, and I guess, do we have two here? No, yeah, we do have a couple here. So when you use these pads, you want to make sure that you don't put too many finger marks onto the pads. That's why there's protective film right over there with a little tab. So what we're going to do is we're going to first put the pad onto right here rather than on the NVMe drive directly. This doesn't give you a good guide as to where to go. So I'm going to place this like, let's see, like this, because this is how it's going to go onto the drive. And I'm going to ever so gently, and not put fingerprints on, try to place it exactly where it needs to go. Which looks about right. Yeah, that's about right. So now we'll kind of push it down with our thumbs, and then we'll take the tab over here, and then we'll pull off. There's a little tab over on this side, so it'll go into the little insert here, but the other end, this is the bigger part, the bigger tab, that's going to go on this side where it says open. So I'm going to flip this around nice and gently, and then we're going to put this down into that little notch, and then we're going to push it down and then go from there. Keep in mind there's no screws in here, so this bottom part could pop off if it gets dropped or anything like that. But with the thermal tape on there, the thermal pad, that should also be sticking to both this bottom part of the case and the NVMe. And as time goes by, as it heats up, it'll probably stick a lot better. So I don't think I got that in. Let me do that again. There we go. There we go. Now it's fastened correctly. So that thermal pad should be hitting onto the NVMe to disperse the heat throughout the case, because that's what this case is one big heat sink. Now, really quickly inside of here, before we plug it in, it is running the Intel JHL 9840 chipset for the transfer to the computer. And it doesn't matter whether it's Mac or PC, even though there's an Intel chip in here, it will work no matter what type of machine. And once again, the speeds are going to really depend on what type of device you're plugging it into, what type of hub. We're first going to plug it into a Thunderbolt 5 drive, since this is a Thunderbolt 5 cable, which is interesting. And then we'll see what the speeds are there. And then I'll plug it into a Thunderbolt 3 or USB 4 speeds and see where we go from there. Of course, Geekazine has a whole bunch of merch, including t-shirts and hoodies. Like, for instance, the Geekazine logo hoodie. We got some great t-shirts, including 80s Jesus Saved Me, Guardian of the Geekery, the original Geek AI t-shirt. We have a couple variations of this one. And then I Like Geek Butts and I Cannot Lie. There are several more and more that are being added to the Geekazine merch page. So you can check that out over at Teespring. If you're on YouTube, you'll see those links below. And then over at amazon.com/shop/Geekazine. I appreciate that very much because it does support the channel. Just so you know, I actually had to replace the drive in there to a Lexer drive. It's also going to give me 7,000 megabytes read and write, but the other one, I just had data on it and I couldn't erase it. So this one's a completely wiped drive. So here we are. We've got this disk speed test all ready to go. We're just going to select the target drive. We did format for APFS, so it should run at its most optimal. And we have it directly plugged into the Mac Mini Pro, which is in a Thunderbolt 5 port. So let's go ahead and run this test. Look at that. Oh, wow. Constant 6. And what I like about this, you'll see some of these drives where basically it will start at a number, but then it'll start to dwindle down a little bit. Notice how this needle is not going down too much from where it starts. So it gets up to about 640 and goes down to 6035. So it's the consistency is there, which is great. That means if I have a 10 gig file that I'm transferring over, it'll transfer over fairly fast. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. We'll transfer over one file and see what happens. All right, best I can do is a 6 gigabyte file basically a 4K video that I rendered here. So we're gonna go straight from the Mac Mini into the Lexer. So let's see how fast that goes. So we're gonna go ahead and bring it over. And it's done. And it took a couple seconds. That was pretty fast. Of course, we're going from the Mac Mini hard drive to this device. So, and of course, the speed on the Mac Mini, I'm not sure of the read-write speed on that. I'll have to look that up as we go. But as you can see, it transferred very fast. So if we had like maybe something a little bit bigger, like 20 to 30 gigabytes, transferring that over, or multiple files for that matter, then transferring it over might be really fast as well. And of course, it really depends on the source as well, because if your source is running at 3,000 megabytes per second and you're running at 6,000, 7,000 megabytes per second, that makes a big difference right there. But for the most part, I was really impressed with the speeds of that. And it's just amazing what you can do with these little enclosure drives. Of course, you could also plug it into USB 3, which we're going to do next. I have this now hooked up to my MacBook Air, which is an M2, and this is Thunderbolt 4. And as you can see, the speed of the same Lexer disk in the speed test is showing at about 3,100 megabytes per second. It is definitely running slower, but it's still running at some great write and read speeds for whatever you need. So if I was doing video, as you can see from here, if I was doing video, I probably don't want to do 12K DCI 60, but if I was doing like standard 1080p 60 frames a second feed, I could do that without a problem. I did run into one issue here, and that is I plugged it into the USB-C, just a regular USB-C, and it's supposed to connect up to USB-C 3.0 via their website. But every time I plugged it in, it would not recognize the drive at all. So I'm going to be trying this with a couple other devices. I'm going to switch over to my Windows machine and see if this will recognize it. So after that speed test on the Mac, which worked perfect with Thunderbolt 5, this drive is awesome. But the one thing it said was backwards compatibility, and that's what really gets me. And there's another drive that I reviewed that had the same thing, and we're going to find a couple similarities here in a second here. But basically what I did was I connected the AGeen to the front ports of my Mac Mini, which were just basically USB-C. They're 10 gigabit per second ports. So I was expecting something like 900 to a gig speed, maybe even less. But the thing is, they didn't connect. There was no connection whatsoever. So I decided, as I did with the other device, I decided to see, well, what other devices would connect up. It's when you're connecting this to the PC that becomes a problem. And of course, I had to format that for exFAT to be able to read it on the PC. My main PC, which is an Asus ProArt with Thunderbolt 4 ports on it, does not recognize the drive at all, just like with the other one I reviewed I was talking about. I have my HP ZBook right in front of me, and the ZBook was giving me somewhere around 700 megabytes for the read and a little 650, I believe it was, for the write. You're seeing the numbers right there. And so I compared that to another brand that, because I've reviewed like 6 or 7 brands now, I compared that with another brand that I was using, so it's matching about that. And the HP ZBook has Thunderbolt 3 ports on them, so I'm not sure why it's not working on my Asus ProArt. I'm using Thunderbolt 4 otherwise, so I know that that's working, but it doesn't work in the other. And of course, the other device, which I'm going to show you in a second here, and there's a reason why, also does not work on the ProArt. You're looking at the PCB board of the AGeen and then the other one. Notice these similarities to it. I mean, this has just got this extra enclosure on here, but the big telltale sign, well, it does have the rubber stopper on both of them, but the big telltale sign is right here. This number and this number right here. As you can see, the boards line up fairly close to each other. So if I was to take this PCB out of this enclosure, we would probably see the exact same board, which makes sense because this is the Intel board that we were talking about. And I talked to them about it, and they said, yeah, it's everything that this other brand was. I have a feeling that they're both the same brand, but we won't get into that speculation anyway. The bottom line is that the backwards compatibility that they're talking about on a USB 3.1, 3.0 only works in a Thunderbolt manner. So if you're planning to buy one of these drives and then hook it into your older computer that has USB 3.0, just regular USB-C port, not a Thunderbolt port, you might be in for a shock, as it might not work for you. I connected this up to a few different PCs. I was really hoping that this would also connect up into a non-PC format, connecting it up to a system, basically a system that records all the video for me. And it doesn't recognize these drives whatsoever because they're non-Thunderbolt ports. Anything that Thunderbolt, for the most part, minus that ProArt, is connecting from what I saw. The MacBook Air connected fine, this HP ZBook connected fine, no problems whatsoever. However, when I think of backwards compatibility, I think that it will go, pretty reasonable into another system. But if they're not Thunderbolt, then backwards compatibility can be questionable. And we'll leave it at that because I don't think that these drives are going to connect. They'll be perfect on your MacBook Mini and your MacBook Air and your MacBook Pro. But moving it over to the PC side, we're seeing a little bit of questionability to it. And of course the speeds, they matched, so everything's working good as for speeds on this thing. There is another issue that I have, and that's these thermal pads, and I had it with the other one as well that I was talking about that has the same board. These thermal pads are way too thin, and so I don't see them touching the NVMe drive at all. They're just sitting there above it. Whereas I have another one which has thermal pads that are a little bit thicker, and then you could tell when they touch it because A, it's hard to lift this off the case, and B, you actually hear it. And sometimes even the thermal pad will start to unstick from the base here. That's telling me there's some sort of contact as it gets tougher to actually pull this off. And I like that because if it sticks on there, then if you accidentally drop this drive, it doesn't pop open as easy as I would expect it to do. So with these pads, I would not use these pads. You could double them up because they do give you 2-3 pads in the box, but you can also go on Amazon and get thermal pads easily. You can get the thicker kinds. Some of the other issues that I have, which I had with this other drive, I like the rubber stopper. I like the ease of putting in a NVMe into the drive. However, the rubber stopper just feels too easy to pull out. I'm not a big fan of it. With the ProArt, the NVMe's had these screws that basically you turned it a quarter turn, and then you could put your NVMe in and then turn it back a quarter turn, and they locked up. So you had a tight screw, and then there was a locking mechanism that pulled it open. I would have loved to see that. In fact, this other drive, that's the problem with the other drive, is it's just got straight up screws. So you really got to, I have to take off my glasses and get up close to look at the screw hole so I can get that in and tighten it up. Not a big deal, but definitely a small little annoyance. And so having something easier to set up is great. I've never done any drop tests on these, so I don't know if they're going to pop out as easily. But the bottom line is that if you are using these a lot, and if they're prone to falling off of a shelf, for example.
Oh, seriously? I saw that. Troublemaker.
You might want to think about how you can reinforce the outer edge. So other than that, vents worked great. The fan, you press the button, the fan sped up, and there was no problems there, just like with the other one. These are things that you got to keep in mind if you're buying something like this, because you can have all the speed in the world, and if you hook it up to the right machine, it's going to do a great job. But if you're like me and you work in multiple environments with multiple computers, something like this is not a portable option for other devices. And so that's what the warning I give to you when you get this. What do you think of the AGeen 80 gigabit per second. Well, we're going to call this Thunderbolt 5 drive because that's what it is a Thunderbolt 5 drive. Let me know in the comments below over at Geekazine.com, youtube.com/Geekazine, where you can like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you know when the next video comes out. Until next time, you guys geek out and store your media fast with AGeen. All right, let's talk for a minute here about AE Juice. I am now an affiliate of AE Juice, in where I'm taking this content and making my videos better, and you could do the same thing too, from LUTs to sound effects to transitions to even AI elements and a lot more. You can bring a whole ton of stuff in. You're seeing that as we're going. You can check that out over at Geekazine.com/AE Juice for the free starter pack. Of course, there's many other packs over at AE Juice. You can check that out over there, but Geekazine.com/AE Juice.